Have you ever felt it? That quiet, unsettling feeling that the safety you enjoy comes at a hidden price. That deep within the architecture of our world, a silent contract was signed long before you were born, a contract that bartered a piece of your wild, untamed soul for the promise of a peaceful sleep. This isn't just a political idea, it is a profound spiritual truth that hums beneath the surface of our reality, a vibration that many of us are now beginning to feel with startling clarity. It speaks of a choice made in the shadows of history, a decision between two kinds of terror. If you have ever felt this deep resonance, this sense that our order is built upon a foundation of ancient fear, I want you to connect with this energy right now. Let the universe know you are awakening to this truth by typing "I feel the contract" in the comments below, and share this message with others who are ready to see beyond the veil. Your validation helps countless others realize they are not alone in this profound awakening. Imagine, for a moment, stepping outside of everything you know. Picture a world stripped bare of all authority, a reality with no governments to make rules, no laws to offer protection, no institutions to turn to when you are wronged. What does that feel like in your spirit? Is it a liberating expanse of pure freedom, an idyllic return to some innocent divine past? Or does the thought of it send a shiver of primal fear through your very being? A brilliant, and perhaps deeply scarred, philosopher named Thomas Hobbes stared into this abyss, and what he saw was not a paradise. He called this raw, unfiltered state of existence the state of nature, but for him, it wasn't an innocent garden. It was a terrifying spiritual void, a chaotic vortex, where every soul is pitted against every other soul. This wasn't a distant fiction for him. He lived through the brutal collapse of political order during the English Civil War, a time when brother turned against brother, and the very fabric of society was torn to shreds. What he witnessed in that crucible of chaos shaped his darkest, most provocative spiritual insight, that without a powerful, centralized, and absolute authority, human life inevitably reverts to a state of perpetual war, a war of all against all. In this state of nature, survival is not a matter of justice or divine right. It is a brutal calculation of power. Trust becomes a dangerous illusion, a vulnerability that will almost certainly be exploited. In this world, every other person you meet is not a fellow traveler on a spiritual journey, but a potential enemy, a rival for scarce resources, a threat to your very existence. Every interaction is haunted by a constant, gnawing anxiety, the ever-present fear of sudden, violent death. Think of it not just as a physical battle, but as a psychic war. Your mind becomes a fortress, your heart is shielded, and your spirit is on constant alert. You cannot afford the luxury of compassion when your primary energetic output is dedicated to self-preservation. Hobbes argued that this descent into chaos isn't because humanity is inherently evil in some moral or spiritual sense. It's not a failure of the soul. Rather, it is the logical, unavoidable outcome of a species driven by the most fundamental impulse of all, the instinct to survive. We are wired for self-preservation, and in an environment of total uncertainty and fear, that instinct becomes our sole compass. This is where Hobbes reveals what he believed to be the raw, unfiltered truth about our nature when it is stripped of all societal constructs. We strike preemptively. We lie, we betray, we manipulate, not out of malice, but because of the terrifying certainty that if we don't, someone else will do it to us first. It's a grim feedback loop of fear. Your fear of your neighbor justifies your actions against them, and your actions, in turn, confirm their fear of you. This perpetual state of conflict is what led Hobbes to his most famous and chilling description of life in the state of nature. Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And he meant every single word. This was not rhetoric designed for effect. This was his diagnosis of the human condition when trust is replaced by fear and when the drive for survival completely overrides any sense of morality. In this vision, morality itself is not a divine law etched into our hearts from the beginning. It is a luxury, something that can only emerge after the foundational need for security is guaranteed. Until that security is established, Fear is the only king. Fear rules everything. But Hobbes was not simply offering a dark fable. He was making a profound claim about the very nature of civilization, an argument that still resonates with an unsettling power today. He argued that we are not naturally cooperative or peaceful beings. We do not come together out of a shared sense of love or a divine impulse for unity. We come together out of necessity. We come together out of a shared, mutual fear. Civilization, then, is not the beautiful flowering of our best qualities. It is a fragile agreement, a desperate truce born of our terror of the alternative. It is a social contract. And when that agreement breaks, when the social contract collapses, we don't simply descend into chaos, we return to it. It is our default state, the primal reality lurking just beneath the polished veneer of our societies. History, tragically, offers far too many examples that echo this terrifying idea. In times of war, revolution, or catastrophic disaster, we see how quickly that thin veil of order is torn apart. People hoard resources. Panic spreads like a virus. Neighbors turn on each other. The structures we took for granted dissolve, and we are left face to face with that raw, instinctual fear. Hobbes saw this not as an exception, but as a natural reversion, a glimpse of what truly lies beneath our sophisticated systems and polite societies. What scared him wasn't just the violence itself, but how quickly and completely we accept it when fear takes hold. And so, his philosophy forces us to reconsider the very essence of what we think of as freedom. In the state of nature, you are, in a sense, absolutely free. You are free to do whatever you want, to take whatever you can, to act on any impulse. But that freedom is a curse. Because you are free to kill, you are also free to be killed. You are free to take whatever you want, but you are never safe enough to truly enjoy it. This is the profound paradox at the heart of his philosophy. Hobbes challenges the romantic notion that human beings can truly flourish without restraint. He holds up a darker mirror, reflecting a truth that many of us find deeply uncomfortable, that without order, freedom becomes insecurity, and insecurity inevitably breeds conflict. It is this foundational insight that sets the stage for everything that follows in Hobbes's political philosophy. It explains the desperate need for structure, the deep, soul-level longing for peace, and it illuminates the terrifying cost of a liberty that exists without any limits. The state of nature is not just a past we have escaped. It is a constant threat, a shadow that lives beneath the surface of every society, waiting, watching, ready to rise again whenever the great beast that holds it at bay falls asleep. This great beast, this solution to the endless terror of chaos, is what Hobbes called the Leviathan. If fear is the origin of chaos, then paradoxically, Hobbes argued, fear can also be the seed of order. And this is where he makes his boldest and most unsettling move. Rather than trying to remove fear from the human equation, he uses it. He weaponizes it, even, to construct his vision of political stability. From the ruins of the state of nature, he imagines a new creature rising, the Leviathan. But this is not some mythological monster to be feared from afar. It is a collective being, a sovereign entity born from the will of the people themselves. It is created through a contract, an agreement in which every single individual agrees to surrender their natural freedoms, their right to judge, punish, and defend themselves in exchange for protection. This is not a partial protection, not a conditional peace. It is absolute security, guaranteed by an absolute power. For Hobbes, this was the only way to escape the endless, bloody spiral of violence. The Leviathan was not a tyrant imposed from above. It was a reflection of our own human desperation. It is a mirror held up to the deepest part of our collective need to survive. The true genius of Hobbes lies in this transformation, turning our greatest weakness, our fear, into the very foundation of our greatest strength, an ordered society. What others saw as a flaw in human nature, he turned into a principle of political architecture. People, according to him, would only agree to live together peacefully if they feared the alternative, the state of nature, more than they resented the authority of a sovereign. So, they create a sovereign, a singular, undivided power that becomes greater than the sum of its parts. This sovereign isn't just a ruler, it's a construct of our collective will, a fiction so powerful it becomes real. Through this contract, individuals become subjects. But they do so not out of love or loyalty, but out of the cold, hard logic of necessity. They give up the right to judge, punish, and defend themselves, and they transfer those rights to the Leviathan. And in return, the Leviathan gives them what no single human being can promise alone: peace. But that peace has a price. It demands obedience. It demands that you accept being ruled. It demands that you submit. For Hobbes, this was not a tragedy, it was salvation. This radical concept revolutionized political philosophy. He wasn't just proposing another system of government. He was redefining the fundamental relationship between individuals and power. Before him, many believed that authority had to be justified by divine right or some inherent moral virtue. Hobbes swept all of that aside. To him, the legitimacy of power came not from God or justice, but from fear itself. It came from the silent, desperate agreement of people who preferred the chains of order to the knives of chaos. And this insight cuts deep into the heart of what we consider civilization. It tells us that our laws are not born from some higher truth, but from our terror of what happens without them. And so, the Leviathan becomes more than a king or a state. It becomes a psychological necessity, an embodiment of our willingness to trade absolute freedom for the promise of not being killed in our sleep. In this way, Hobbes offers not hope, but a stark clarity. And that clarity, even when it's cold, has a strange kind of comfort. Still, we must acknowledge that the Leviathan is not a hero. It is not meant to be admired. It is a terrifying idea, and Hobbes knew that, but he believed the true terror was the alternative. Without the Leviathan, life collapses into suspicion, betrayal, and war. With it, we gain structure, institutions, civilization. But we lose something precious too. We lose the freedom to resist, to redefine the rules, to escape control. The Leviathan may protect us, but it also watches us. It keeps us safe, but only as long as we obey. In that fundamental tension, Hobbes sketches the outline of the modern world. A world where power is necessary but never innocent. A world where fear builds nations, and order is always bought with something dear. Perhaps the most haunting part is that Hobbes doesn't offer an escape, only a choice. Live in freedom and die in chaos, or live in order and surrender a part of yourself. In that dilemma, the Leviathan is born, not as a monster, but as a compromise we all make, whether we admit it or not. At the very core of Hobbes's philosophy lies this painful paradox. In order to be safe, we must stop being entirely free. It sounds simple, even logical. But when we pause and truly feel the weight of that trade-off, it becomes clear that we're dealing with one of the deepest tensions of the human condition. The freedom to speak, to move, to resist, to question, to live without oversight is intoxicating. But that same freedom also opens the door to uncertainty, danger, and collapse. On the other hand, security brings comfort and structure, but it demands something in return: compliance. The more we value order, the more we must allow ourselves to be observed, regulated, and controlled. This is not just a philosophical concern. It is a reality that unfolds every single day in the systems we live under. Think about it. Surveillance cameras, national security policies, social media monitoring, our own digital footprints, each is a quiet reminder of the deal we've made. It is a deal Hobbes warned us about centuries ago, but one we still don't fully understand. What Hobbes captured so vividly is that people don't give up their freedom lightly. They do it because they are afraid. And today, fear hasn't disappeared. It has only changed its form. We no longer fear civil war in the same immediate way Hobbes did, but we fear other things: terrorism, crime, pandemics, economic collapse, social instability. And in the face of that fear, we find ourselves willing, sometimes even eager, to accept limits on our freedom. We install tracking apps on our phones to feel safe. We accept constant surveillance in airports and public spaces. We even allow our own devices to monitor us because it gives us the illusion of control. The state, in many ways, has become an updated, more subtle Leviathan. It's not as visible, not as overtly centralized, but it is just as present. And while it rarely uses overt brute force on most of its citizens, it still demands our obedience. The real genius of modern control is that it no longer needs to threaten us directly. It just needs to make us feel afraid enough to agree. This is the modern dilemma. How much freedom are we truly willing to sacrifice for the promise of safety? And more importantly, do we even notice when we're making that sacrifice? Hobbes believed people would make that decision consciously, but today, many of us make it passively. We scroll through terms of service without reading. We accept facial recognition in exchange for faster access. We share our most intimate data for convenience. And each time we do, the line between freedom and control becomes ever blurrier. The Leviathan doesn't have to knock at the door anymore. It's already inside the house. This shift is as much psychological as it is political. The more we get used to being watched, the less we resist. The more we rely on the system for our safety, the more powerless we feel to question it. And eventually, the very idea of true, untamed freedom starts to feel not only dangerous, but absurd. So where does that leave us? Hobbes would say we've made the only rational choice, that the peace we have, however imperfect, is worth the cost. But we are left to ask, is this really peace, or just a different, quieter kind of fear? Are we truly safe, or simply more comfortable in our submission? The fundamental question isn't whether Hobbes was right. It's whether we even realize how much of our world is still built on his cold, hard logic. When we lock our doors at night, when we install security systems, when we tolerate censorship for what we're told is the greater good, we are echoing the same primal fear that birthed the Leviathan centuries ago. And perhaps the most haunting thought is this. Maybe Hobbes didn't just describe a historical moment. Maybe he uncovered something permanent in the human psyche, a wound that never fully heals, a tension that never disappears. And the longer we ignore it, the deeper it grows beneath the surface of our modern lives. There is something deeply unsettling about Hobbes's Leviathan, even if it's logically convincing. The idea of surrendering all of our personal power to a single sovereign entity might bring peace, but it also opens the door to something else, something darker. If we give all authority to one figure or system, who watches that power? What prevents it from turning against us? Hobbes believed that the risk of tyranny was less dangerous than the certainty of chaos. But many thinkers who came after him were not so sure. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for instance, offered a powerful counter-narrative. He saw danger not just in disorder, but in the oppressive nature of absolute rule itself. He argued that when a sovereign has unchecked control, it inevitably stops serving the people and starts controlling them. For Rousseau, freedom wasn't something to be sacrificed for peace. It was the very condition that made peace worth having. And so, a major philosophical divide was born, one that continues to shape our world today. Is safety more important than liberty? Or does liberty define what safety really means? The Leviathan, in its absolute form, is built on a kind of deep-seated pessimism, a belief that humans are too selfish, too violent, and too unpredictable to ever govern themselves. But what if that's not the whole story? What if, as Rousseau believed, humans are not corrupted by their own instincts, but by the very institutions designed to control them? For Rousseau, the problem wasn't the lack of authority, it was the presence of the wrong kind of authority. The Leviathan, he feared, replaced natural freedom with an artificial order. It didn't cure the disease of human conflict, it merely changed its symptoms. Instead of raw violence between individuals, you now had institutionalized violence, legalized through law and enforcement. And this, he argued, was just as dehumanizing. By surrendering ourselves to a sovereign, we risk losing not only our rights, but our very sense of moral agency. We stop asking whether laws are just, and simply assume they must be obeyed. The danger, then, is not just theoretical. History offers countless chilling reminders of what happens when power is centralized without accountability. Dictatorships, police states, regimes that begin with promises of safety and end in total oppression. Hobbes might say those are distortions of the Leviathan, not its true form. But the line between a necessary sovereign and a dangerous tyrant is often only visible in hindsight. Once a people have handed over their autonomy, it becomes incredibly difficult to take it back, especially when the very force that protects them is also the one they fear. Perhaps Hobbes underestimated how deeply human beings crave not just order, but dignity. We want to feel safe, yes, but we also want to feel heard, to feel respected. The Leviathan, in its pure, cold form, has no interest in listening. Its task is to control, not to empathize. And for many philosophers, that makes it not a solution, but a new, more orderly kind of problem. Even today, the echoes of this debate remain alive. Governments around the world justify sweeping new powers in the name of security, mass surveillance, censorship, the erosion of civil liberties, often dressed up as temporary measures, and often accepted by a population too exhausted or too frightened to resist. The irony is painful. In trying to escape fear, we sometimes run straight into its arms. Hobbes offered a mirror to our darkest impulses, but his critics ask a vital question. Should we build a society based on fear at all? Should fear be the primary architect of our politics? Or should it be resisted, challenged, and kept in check by principles stronger than the mere instinct to survive? The Leviathan may be necessary in moments of collapse, but if we make it a permanent fixture, we risk turning a temporary emergency into our enduring norm and losing a vital part of ourselves in the process. The ultimate question, then, is not just about power, it's about trust. Not just trust in authority, but trust in ourselves. It's about whether we believe human beings are capable of more than just obedience. To truly understand Hobbes is to understand the immense political power of fear. Not fear as a passing feeling, but fear as a structure, as an organizing principle. Hobbes didn't just believe that fear motivates action, he believed it defines civilization. In his view, fear is the invisible architect behind every law, every contract, every government. It is not love or a quest for justice that binds society together. It is our collective terror at what would happen without it. That might sound bleak, but for Hobbes, it was simply honest. He had seen what human beings were capable of when left to their own devices: betrayal, cruelty, and raw self-interest, disguised as morality. And so, instead of denying that darkness, he built his entire political philosophy around it. For him, fear wasn't a flaw in human nature. It was the very glue that holds us together. It was the one emotion strong enough to make people submit, cooperate, and obey. And in that submission, he saw the birth of peace. But what does it truly mean to build a society on fear? It means that our sense of security is never unconditional. It is always earned through obedience, through the fear of punishment, the fear of chaos, the fear of the other. These are the forces that keep us in line. And over time, they can become so deeply embedded in our institutions and our own minds that we stop noticing them. We call them laws, protocols, customs. But underneath them, there is always the implicit threat of what happens if we disobey. Hobbes believed this threat was necessary, that without it, society would unravel. But that view leaves very little room for trust or for hope. It assumes that people cannot be relied upon to act justly unless they are afraid. And maybe that's true. But if it is, what does that say about the kind of world we've created and about the kind of people we've become? Fear may keep us alive, but can it ever teach us how to live? This question is more urgent now than ever before. We live in a time where fear is a constant undercurrent in politics, in the media, in our personal relationships. We are constantly told to fear the economy, the climate, the other political party, the stranger, the system, and even ourselves. And each time we act out of that fear, we reinforce the grim logic of Hobbes. We accept more restrictions. We stay silent. We look the other way when power overreaches, because the alternative, the uncertainty, feels worse. In this sense, the Leviathan never disappeared. It simply evolved. It no longer wears a crown or sits on a throne. It lives in our algorithms, in our laws, in the social contracts we've long forgotten how to question. Hobbes might look at our world and say, yes, this is how it must be. But we have to ask ourselves, are we still making that choice consciously? Or have we simply internalized the fear so deeply that it no longer feels like fear at all, but just reality? Perhaps the most haunting insight Hobbes offers is that peace can be built on fear, and that many will accept that bargain without hesitation. But peace built on fear is not the same as peace built on understanding or mutual respect. It is quieter, yes, but it is also colder. Hobbes gives us a world where survival is everything and morality is secondary, a world where the social contract is not a celebration of unity, but a fragile truce between enemies. Maybe that's the world we needed in a time of civil war. But is it still the world we want now? Or are we capable of imagining something more? A politics not driven by fear of what we might become, but by hope in what we could be. Hobbes forces us to confront the shadows at the heart of civilization. He doesn't offer an escape, only clarity. And maybe that clarity is what we need most to see the foundations of our world for what they are, and then decide, consciously and courageously, whether we want to keep living under them. Perhaps the greatest strength of Hobbes's philosophy lies not in his answers, but in the brutal honesty of his questions. He did not try to gild the human condition. He did not write to console, but to reveal. And what he revealed was disturbing, that behind our most civilized institutions, there is fear. That behind our grand ideas of progress and order, there is a shadow, the fear of returning to chaos, violence, and the war of all against all. We build our cities, our political systems, our social rules as walls against this darkness. And we call these walls civilization. But what happens when we start living just to keep those walls up? When all our political efforts are reduced to avoiding collapse, avoiding the other, avoiding risk? This is where Hobbes's vision ceases to be a mere analysis and becomes a mirror that forces us to ask, are we really living, or just protecting ourselves from the worst? The Leviathan is not just a creature of the past. It still breathes among us, silent, omnipresent, sometimes in the state, sometimes in our own minds. And the most dangerous thing is not that it exists. It's that, little by little, we start to see it as normal, as needed, as inevitable. But maybe it isn't. Perhaps we are more ready than we think to imagine a new way of living together, one that does not need to be built on fear, but on trust, responsibility, and dialogue. This takes courage. It requires believing that human beings are capable of more than just obeying to survive. It requires a kind of faith that Hobbes may never have had, but that we may desperately need to cultivate. Because in the end, the real challenge is not defeating the Leviathan. It's recognizing when it has stopped being an answer and has become a prison. And now, it is up to you to look around and within yourself and ask, who are you in this contract? A conscious citizen, an obedient servant, or someone who still believes that freedom, even if fragile, is still worth the risk?